certainly upon us. Just by looking around, you can see it's all over the place. And it's funny, I feel like Halloween's bigger than it used to be. I mean, do you feel that way?
Yes.
Yeah, it's like the decorations are bigger, and the candy is everywhere. And the yard decorations, the yard art, it's everywhere. I mean, it's incredible. There's more blow-up and inflatable things. There's more decorations out there. There's more. The yards are out into the street. I mean, trick-or-treating is big, and yards. Halloween is a bigger deal than it used to be. However, long before October 31st meant Halloween, it also meant something else. We could call it the day that the blanks started to be filled in. We can call it that largely because of what we've been talking about for the last 7 weeks. We've been talking about blanks in our lives. These times when we encounter a situation, we run up against somebody, something happens where we're stumped, or we're silenced, or we don't know what to do next. We don't know how to decide, we don't know what to say, we don't know where to go, we kind of don't know what to believe, and everything just sort of stops. And it feels like there's this blank, and we have to figure out, how do we fill in the blank? Well, there was a day when the blanks started to be filled in a long, long time ago. And it began on an October 31st, which we're going to call the other Halloween. It happened hundreds of years ago, in fact, and 34 years before the October 31st that we're talking about, a young boy was born. His name, let's call him Marty. Marty was born, and he had a tough home life. His home clearly was a beautiful home, but he had a tough life in that home. His parents were extremely strict. Some have called them severe. It's been described that he had a very austere upbringing. They were so strict because they wanted the best for Marty. His dad, Marty's dad, destined Marty to be a lawyer. He knew that Marty needed to be a lawyer because that was a respectable profession, a good income and a stable life that he would earn, and a place of reputation in his community. So he wanted Marty to be a lawyer. So he had high expectations for Marty at home and in school, but Marty failed to meet them almost all the time. He failed to meet him in class at school, he failed to meet him at home in his discipline and his responsibilities. He just failed. And when he failed, he was very swiftly punished for it. Marty grew to fear his parents because of the punishment that they brought. In fact, later in his life, when he's reflecting back on this experience as a child, he describes being scared of his father because of the discipline and the punishment he knew he was going to get when he failed, and he failed a lot. A little later in his life, when he was a young adult, Marty knew that he had a strong faith. Through all of his upbringing and this challenge in his upbringing, in his home, in his school, they all went to church. Well, everybody went to church in that time. And they had a close relationship with their church. They went to Bible studies. They went to church on Sunday. They hosted groups in their home. They knew lots of the religious leaders that were. They knew a lot of the religious leaders that were in their community. They had a close connection with their church and with their faith. And Marty had a strong faith. He knew Jesus. He knew God loved him. He knew the Bible. In fact, he knew it backwards and forwards. He knew that his faith was strong. Yet, he still had this complex inside him. Just before his 22nd birthday, there was a huge thunderstorm in his town. The rain fell and kept coming, the thunder kept coming, and Marty got so scared So scared, in fact, that he was going to die that night, that he prayed and he made a deal. And he said, God, if you save me from this thunderstorm and don't let me die, I will serve you by becoming a monk in the local monastery. Marty survived. And Marty became a monk in the local monastery, just shy of his 22nd birthday. And he spent so much time in this monastery, that's where he poured himself into. How do you think Dad felt about the monastery? Not so good. Marty's dad felt like the monastery was the worst thing that could ever happen to Marty. And Marty felt like the worst thing that could ever happen to himself was becoming a lawyer. So Marty was happy to be in the monastery. It actually fed his soul.
Amen.
See, he had this complex growing up, as you can imagine by this point, knowing what we know, that he was never good enough. He was never good enough for Dad, he was never good enough for Mom, he was never good enough for teacher, he was never good enough for career ahead, he was never good enough for anything. And that was the same feeling he had about his faith. He was never good enough also for God. And this was how the church worked in his day. The church was largely about you're not good enough. So you sin, I sin, we all sin, and we've got to climb our way out of sin. So the church said, you've got to work on your sin. And the way to do that is you confess every single sin you commit. You do acts of service to counteract those sins and those things that we do against God. And you even do more than that. You purchase things to help climb out of sin and make yourself right before God. And Marty still had this feeling of, even despite all doing that, it's not enough. He had this growing weight on his shoulders that he never felt like he was right with God. No matter how much he did, no matter how much he confessed, no matter how much he bought, he was never good enough. So when he got into the monastery and became a monk, started studying the Bible, praying all the time, disciplining his life, doing every right thing he could imagine, Marty still felt like he was falling short of what God wanted. It didn't matter all that he did. In fact, he said, the more he did, the heavier the weight was. He felt like it is impossible to be right with God. He even described it this way. He said, I felt that I had... Oh, sorry. Gotta go back. He even shared this with his superior at the monastery. His struggle with this, his deep struggle. And his superior, he actually, instead of disciplining him, his superior said, you need to be a professor. So his superior said, you need to get a degree, and you need to teach others about the Bible. This was kind of a surprise for Marty, but he went for it. He got his doctorate in theology. He started teaching theology and the Bible at the local university. He started teaching others about God and faith and God's experiences with others and the things that God taught people and what it means to be right before God and how to be just before God and what God's justice means to us. He memorized all 150 Psalms. He recited them all the time. He taught all the Psalms to his entire class. And after 2 years of teaching through the Psalms, he got to the book of Romans. And he started teaching his class through the book of Romans. He got 16 verses into the entire book, and he got stuck. He got stuck on a verse that he couldn't get past because he couldn't make sense of it. This is the verse he got stuck on. For in the good news, the righteousness of God is revealed. A righteousness that is by faith from first to last. Just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. Now, knowing what we know about Marty so far, it kind of makes sense why he got stuck here. Remember, he's feeling like, I can't be good enough. I cannot be right before God. It's impossible. It doesn't matter what I do, how much I do, where I go, what I buy, what my habits are like. I cannot be right before God. And then he reads this verse, And it says, the right person will live by faith. And he says, no, that's not how it is. That can't be. That's not my own experience. That's not what the church has taught me. That's not what the leaders teach me. That's not how I read the Bible. That doesn't make sense at all. And this left Marty with a blank. The biggest blank he had ever experienced. How can I possibly be right with God and understand what this says in the Bible? Until the tower. Marty spent some time in the tower at the monastery where he lived for a number of years. He spent time in this tower poring over this one verse. He read it, he meditated on it, he listened for God's voice, he screamed in frustration, he told other people about his struggle. Day and night, he was burdened over what does this verse mean? And how do I make sense of it? And then one day, he had what he called the Tower Experience, where God revealed to him the truth of this verse. That it doesn't matter what you and I do. We can't do enough, we can't be right enough, we can't be good enough, no matter what we do. It's only by God's gracious invitation that we can come have the best life possible with God.
Amen.
Marty couldn't do it. His degrees couldn't do it. His habits couldn't do it. His discipline couldn't do it. Nothing could do it. It was all God's faith that could make that possible. And when Marty had this understanding, this revelation of what this verse meant and what faith was all about, he realized that meant a lot of other blanks needed to be filled in. So, on October 31st of that year, he posted 95 blanks up on a church door in his hometown to talk about it. He wanted people to talk about what does this mean and how does this work, because all these things are blank to me and I don't understand how they can work if we become right with God and have the best life possible with God purely by faith. He wanted to know how it worked. He wanted to discuss it. So he posted these on the other Halloween. That, if there ever was a date, that was the date that the Reformation began. That ushered in a whole new season of us understanding our faith like people never understood faith before. And praise God for it, because we live in an age where we're benefiting from all the things that God revealed to them in that time. So many blanks were filled in, and we're going to look at a couple of them. Blank number one is about how do we get to live the best life? I get to live the best life. How? I mean, we scratched the surface of this with Marty already. You know, he was struggling with this and going through this. And everyone said that in his day that the best life that God has for you and me is achieved by work. The harder we work, the more we do, the longer our list is, the more we confess, the more we buy our way, the more people we know. This is what gets us to the life that God has in store for us. And this was a serious, ingrained lifestyle. Everybody, pretty much, saw it this way and thought this way. No matter how hard anybody worked, that's just impossible, even still, to find that life. I think everybody has a best life for them. Whether they believe in Jesus or not, I think we all have like a best life out there. You know, the life that I dream of is the life of ultimate relaxation. The life I dream of is an ultimate adventure. The life I dream of is seeing every place on earth that is beautiful. The life I dream of is to learn and learn and read and learn and know everything there is to learn. I mean, we all have like a best life that we could ever live. And we are good at trying to reach it. The funny thing is, what seems to happen to nearly everybody is that whatever we're trying to achieve, once we think we found it, we realize, oh, wait a minute, there's something else. If I went to the best place I ever thought I could go, there's still another one. Somebody tells about another spot that we need to go. Or if we read a book that's amazing, we find another one that's amazing. I mean, we are insatiable in our appetites for the best that's out there. And that's good. God has created us with this insatiable appetite for the best life. The problem is we can't ever find it or reach it by whatever we do. And that's what Marty found. I can't reach the best life that God has put inside me by whatever I do. It can only happen when God invites me into it. It happens by faith. And it's not to say that God doesn't have high standards. I mean, God has sky-high standards for how we live and what we do and how good we are and the things that we achieve. God has super high standards. But it's not us who are going to achieve them on our own. I went to an elementary school that was fairly small. It was an elementary school where we had basically one class per grade. And so we all pretty much knew each other going through school. A lot of us stayed there the whole time. So as we went through first grade and second grade, we started to know each other decently well. By sixth grade, we were like a cohort that had gone through all those years. We all knew each other, and we were sort of friends, best friends with others, but we were all at least friends that knew each other. In October of my sixth grade year, Josh Wickland announced that he was going to have a party. And when Josh has a party, everybody wants to go to Josh's party. I mean, Josh was like the cool kid. He was an athlete. He was better at nearly every sport than everybody else. He was funny. He was fun to be around. He was fun to talk to. You always wanted to be on his team at recess because they always won. He was a pretty bright kid, so he did well in school. So if he ever did anything, everybody wanted to be there. My problem was, I wasn't best friends with Josh. I wasn't on the inner circle that he always hung out with. We didn't hang out on the weekends or after school. I didn't go over to his house to play or do anything else. And our parents weren't friends either. So I felt like I knew Josh, but I wasn't his best friend. So when the party came up, when everybody started hearing about the party, I felt like my chances were maybe 50-50. Like, was I going to get invited to Josh's party or not? So I thought, what can I do? Like, how can I secure an invitation to Josh's party? I thought, well, I can talk to him a little more, just make sure he realizes that I exist. I could try to do really well at recess on the team so he could notice that I was really good at whatever the sport was we were playing. I got to do something. And that's all I could really come up with. I thought, there's got to be a way that I can get invited to Josh's party. But then at some point I realized, actually, I can't. There's nothing I can do to make him invite me to his party. We can't do anything to make God invite us to live the life that God created us to live. When God invites us, it is because God chooses to invite us. It is by faith that we discover that God has invited us to join with God in the best life possible. I get to live the best life on faith. That's the way that God invites anyone and everyone into the life that God has in store for us. The second blank that Marty discovered is about the Bible. Bibles in Marty's day looked like this. They were pretty. They were illustrated. They were colorful. They were attractive. They were picture books. I mean, they were amazing to look at. But the problem was, they were written in Latin. Now, Marty and his friends, and Marty and his family, and Marty and his church, they all spoke German. So if all the Bibles are in Latin, and we speak German, there's a problem, isn't there? Yeah. We can't read the Bible. And so the Bible was not in Marty's language. And he realized, if we are going to live the best life that God has in store for us, we need to understand from the Bible what this best life is all about and what this looks like. We need to be able to read about that. But the problem was that nobody could, because it wasn't in their language. Well, this worked really well for the church in Martin's day. They were perfectly fine with this, because there were certain people who could read Latin. That was the leaders, and the bishops, and the priests, and those who were in authority, and so their job was to read it and then pass on to people like us, you and me, the average people, what it meant. So they translated it and they passed it on so that we could understand what the best life with God is like. Do we see any problems with that?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. So we see some problems with that. Yes, they could pick and choose. They could translate it in a different way. They could tell us what they wanted us to learn or not learn. All kinds of problems arise with this. And Marty realized, I get to know God by the Bible. And so the Bible needs to be readable to the average person. Well, let's go back to this Bible, these Latin Bibles. Imagine that your Bible is written in French or Japanese or Mandarin or some language that you don't speak, and that's all you have access to. Are you going to be able to understand and know much of anything about God? I mean, we're going to look at it and say, I don't know what to do with this. I can't read this. And if we can't read it, if we can't understand it, then we're not going to be able to know what God is telling us. Well, for Marty, shortly after he posted the 95 blanks on the door for people to talk about, things got really heated in his life. People got really contentious, a lot of disagreement. They realized Marty's stirring up all this stuff that is dangerous and we don't want to talk about, and so we need to figure out what to do with Marty. Well, a couple of years later, he was invited to an official hearing where they asked Marty, I want you to say that you don't believe all these things anymore. And of course, Marty refused. He said no, and so the authorities said, we're going to burn your books, we're going to throw you out of the church, and we're going to declare that everything you say is wrong and illegal. Then they arrested Marty. But before they arrested Marty, he had a friend. One of his best friends had orchestrated this great kidnapping scheme, where before the authorities actually grabbed him, he escaped, and his friend took him to a 500-year-old castle where nobody knew where he was. And he hid there for almost a year. He was safe, he was sound, and he was never arrested. What did he do while he was in the castle, all by himself? Well, since he was convinced that everybody needed to be able to read the Bible, he decided, I'm going to translate the Bible into the language that everybody can read. So he started with the New Testament. And for those 10 months that he was there, he translated most of it, and then finished it soon after he was gone. And then he started with the Old Testament. 10 years later, he had the entire Bible translated for his people to be able to read in their language. We have such an incredible privilege to be able to have the Bible at our fingertips all the time. We don't depend on anybody else to be able to read it for us. or to be able to tell us, even in some basic terms, what does it mean? We can read it. We can see the love of Jesus on the pages. We can see the faith that God has given to us, the blessings that God has poured out. We can see the character of God. We can see the experiences of people with God. It is right in front of us all the time, and we have access to it. If we want to get to know God, we get to know God because we can just read the Bible that's in front of us. And hundreds of years ago, they couldn't do it. We get to know God by reading the Bible. It's from these two blanks that pretty much all the other blanks flow from. So you can rest easy that we're not going to go through the other 93 blanks. You can do those on your own. There are so many other blanks that flow from this, that we get to live the best life possible by faith alone in God. And we get to know God just simply by reading the Bible. So many blanks get filled in as we dedicate our lives to these things at the foundation. So, and as we see costumes tomorrow, as we see candy doled out, as we see baskets, as we see yard decorations, remember that before this Halloween, there was another one that completely changed the course of our faith. Let's pray.